All right, we are in Matthew chapter 13. At verse 24. So, the parable of the wheat and tares. So we're into the second parable now. This is really a parable about judgment, and we'll see that as we get into it. But let's remember, last week we looked at this parable of the soils, really, and we looked at the hard soil, the rocky soil, right? All the soils and the different responses that the people had because of those soils. And the disciples, I think, at this point are going, okay, so now we see the difference between how people are going to respond. And it's our expectation then that once we determine whether someone is good soil or not good soil, whether they've received Christ or not received Christ, that God's judgment is going to come. They're going to be wiped out. They only understood the kingdom when we started talking about the kingdom as something that was that was righteous, something that was pure, something that only the righteous could go into. But when Jesus talks about the kingdom here, and we said this kind of on the first on the introduction to chapter 13, when Jesus talks about the kingdom here, that kingdom includes both righteous and unrighteous. It's the kingdom here on earth. It's the kingdom that he's in charge of, which is just this earth, which includes both the righteous and the unrighteous. So the question then that would be in the disciples' mind is, okay, well, what happens to unbelievers during this age? Well, if they don't get wiped out, what happens to them? And really, this parable is really to address that issue. All right, so let's begin looking at verse 24. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. So we're going to look at 24 through whatever it is, 30, and then we're going to also look at the explanation from 36 to 43. So this first part's going to go pretty quick. We're just going to make sure you understand what the parable says, and then we'll spend more time once we get to the explanation. So first of all, right in this thing, just to point out a couple of things, the kingdom of heaven is like, right? So again, he's trying to explain to them what this kingdom of heaven is, this kingdom of heaven here on earth. What is it like? It's like a man who sowed good seed in his field. So two things there to note. He sowed good seed, right? There's nothing wrong with the seed. And he sowed that seed in his field, right? We're going to come back to both of those things in the explanation, but I want you to note them here. And then verse 25, but while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. So interesting, several of the commentaries mentioned that this was kind of a common practice in those days. If you really didn't like your neighbor, you would go and sow some kind of a bad crop in the midst of his crop to get back to him, to get revenge. So I guess this would not be a surprising story that he would tell here. It's a good way to ruin your neighbor. Notice here a couple things. One, while the men slept, we're going to talk about that when we come back to the explanation. And then the other thing, he sowed tares among the wheat. The word among there is a little bit weak in the English. It really means that he sowed tares everywhere. He sowed tares all throughout the wheat. It wasn't a sparse population of tares. It was a large population of tares that were sown, as indicated by that word. The last thing is, notice that it says, he sowed them among the wheat and went his way. As we talked about last time, weeds do not require any particular attention, right? You don't have to worry about growing weeds. They do just fine by themselves. So once Satan plants these tares, they take care of themselves, and he just goes on his way and does other things. Again, something we'll talk more about. Verse 26, but when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So what's interesting about this word, there's a lot of discussion in the commentaries about this word tares. It probably is a misinterpretation of the original, which is a crop they call darnel, which supposedly is a crop that is that looks exactly like wheat. The piece that comes out of the ground looks like wheat. When it grows up into a stalk, it looks like wheat. You can really not tell it from wheat until the fruit comes, until the head comes. That's when you can tell that it's wheat. And so, so when they say here, when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. But so he's saying that they both came up at the same time. They both came up and they looked just like another. One of the commentaries said that they actually called this stuff bastard wheat because you could not tell it apart. You couldn't tell it apart from the wheat. The other thing about this crop, however, was as compared to wheat, it was poisonous. So if you did not get rid of it and you harvested it with the wheat and then ground it up, you would end up with bread or whatever that would make you sick. So it was something that very important for them to take care of. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Figured I hadn't been late for a while, you know.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure you knew. All right. And in conclusion,
So good to be like.
all right, I just got hit by Joanne. All right, verse 28.
And that's
Verse 28. He said to them, "An enemy has done this." The servants said to him, "Do you want us to go and to gather them up?" So first of all, an enemy does this. He identifies that there's an enemy, right? He identifies that there's someone who has done this, and that person is an enemy. And then their response is, "Well, do you want us to go and gather them up? Do you want us to go and get the darnel and take it away?" The problem, of course, is that you could not tell the tares from the wheat. And so in verse 30, he responds, verse 29, but he said, "No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them." So, if you go out there and you try to get rid of the tares, you're going to actually pull up the wheat also. Those of you who have a garden and have tried to weed, you know exactly what this is about, right? If you're pulling weeds right next to your crop, you're often pulling up the crop also. So he's just telling them, no, let's not do that. We don't want to hurt the wheat. We don't want to mess with their root system. We don't want to hurt them from growing. So we're going to just leave the tares in the ground. And then verse 30 finally said, "Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares, bind them in bundles and burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn." So again, once the heads come on the wheat and on the tares, then you can tell them apart. Then the reapers can go in. They can take the tares out. They can take the fruit out essentially without bothering the wheat. And I'm not saying it's going to be an easy job, but they can do it without hurting the wheat. The reapers will pull it apart. All right, so gather the wheat into my barn. We'll get back to that in the explanation. All right, so let's go down now to verse 36 and following, where Jesus actually gives them the details as to what this is all about. Fix my notes. All right, verse 36. Then Jesus sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came to him saying, "Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field." So again, let's remember the setting. Jesus is actually out in a boat because the crowd was so large on the seashore. He goes out in a boat. He's teaching them. At this point in time, he's done with the parables. He sent the multitude away. He goes into the house, which is probably, again, Peter's house there on the seashore, and he starts teaching to the multitudes. He starts teaching to the disciples. Now, again, the disciples are probably more than the 12. It's that group that really do understand who he is at this point in time. So there's probably a large crowd inside the house. And they say to him, "Explain to us the parable of the tares in the field." A couple things that's interesting there. One, they call it the parable of the tares in the field, right? They understood it was the tares that they didn't understand. It was the tares that confused them. Why are the tares in the field? That is a question that confused them. So they call it the parable of the tares. They don't call it the parable of the wheat, right? They call it the parable of the tares. The other thing is, lost my place. I don't know, I lost my thought. Anyway, the disciples come to him. The other thing I just want to remind you, this is still the same day, right? This has been a really, really, really long day, which really started back in chapter 12, when he healed the demoniac and he had all the interaction with the Pharisees. Then the Pharisees called him Satan. He has all these interactions, and now he goes to the seashore. He teaches these parables. Now he's back in the house, and now he's trying to explain these parables. This has been some day that Jesus has had, and they keep indicating it's the same day. So quite a day that he's had here. All right, verse 37. Oh, the other thing I just wanted to mention, explain the parable of the tares to us. In between verse 30 and verse 31, there are two other parables. There's the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the leaven, right? The disciples are not asking about those. They're not asking for an explanation to those. They're asking for an explanation for the tares. Now, it could just be that the others are so simple and straightforward that they didn't require an explanation. It also could be that this one particularly bothered them. This one, they really wanted to understand. It confused them. It didn't go with the way that they thought about things, that there would be these tares. And so they really want him to explain this to him. All right, so verse 37. So he answered and said to them, he who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. So right up front, right, he identifies that the sower in this particular parable is the Son of Man, is Jesus, right? That's a name that Jesus used for himself more than any other name. He called himself the Son of Man. He says he's the sower. And again, he's sowing the seed. Remember when I pointed out when we looked at the parable, he's sowing the seed in his field. This is his field. Verse 38, the field is the world. The good seeds are the son of the kingdom, but the tares are the sons of the wicked one. So the field is the world, but remember again, back in the parable in verse 24, it says that the man sowed the good seed in his field. So he's here saying that the world is his field. The world is his. The world belongs to him. Now, we know because we just got through studying Revelation that he eventually gets the title deed to the earth. The earth is given to him by God, etc. officially at the end time, but he's still making the indication that the earth is his, the earth belongs to him by this statement. Now, it's certainly not him in fullness, right? Because Satan is there, and Satan is operating, and Satan is the prince of the earth, if you will. He has usurped the power of Christ on the earth, but it still belongs to him. It's his field that these seeds are sown in. All right, the good seeds are the sons of the kingdom. The good seeds are the children of the kingdom. The good seeds are the seeds that become Christians, right? The seeds that are in the deep soil, in the rich soil, in the soil that produces good fruit. So he identifies that in verse 38. And the tares are the sons of the wicked one. The tares are the sons of the wicked one. Now, a couple things that's important here, right? He identifies that the tares come from the wicked one. Now, we do see down in verse, what verse is it? Verse 39, the enemy who sowed them is the devil. So the wicked one, the devil, same person, right? The tares are the children of the wicked one, the utterly wicked one, the wicked one, right? The devil. You'll notice also, just flip back a minute to verse 24. I guess it's 25. It says, but when men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat. Again, it's interesting to follow the word his in this parable and see what is his. Here it says this is his enemy. The devil is his enemy, is the enemy of Christ. and it's his enemy, right? Not our enemy, it's his enemy. And it's because it's his enemy that he attacks. So what does Satan do? He comes in just as the enemy does, and he oversows the kingdom with tares. He sows among the seeds of of Christ, right? He sows everywhere. It's a massive sowing. And he likes to sow as close as he can to the wheat so that you can't pull them up. It's all intermingled. The tares and the wheat are all intermingled in the world. So practically, what does this mean? That means we live together with these tares, right? We work together, we play together, we sometimes go to church together with tares, right? And the other thing to just make sure you get out of this is anybody who's not a child of the kingdom is a child of the wicked one, right? There's only two things here. It's wheat and tares. There's not some gray area in between. You're either a wheat or a tare. Just look at a couple of verses here a minute. Go to 1 John chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3, verse 10. 1 John chapter 3, verse 10. Mine says, in this the children of God and the children of the devil are manifest. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is he who does not love his brother. The only thing I want to point out here, again, John is saying here, there are two different kinds of people, children of God and children of the devil. And he explains there how they're manifest, or how they are seen, how they are known. Again, it's by their fruit, it's by their practice. Right? Just like the wheat and the tares, they both have nice flower, nice leaves and nice greenery, but when the fruit comes out, then you can tell the difference. He's saying the same thing there. While we're in 1 John, skip over to chapter 5. Chapter 5, verse 19. Verse 19 says, we know that we are of God, and the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. Again, just very clearly saying there are two different kinds of people, those who are of God and those who are of the wicked one, of the devil. The finally, I want to show you Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2, we'll begin right at verse 1. Ephesians 2 says, and you he made alive who were dead in trespasses and sin, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. So just right there, right? You walk differently, but you used to walk in the power of the prince of the air, the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. So there still are sons of disobedience, and they are being controlled by the prince of the power of the air, in other words, by the wicked one, and you are not being controlled by him. So all I'm trying to say is this is not a unique kind of statement that Matthew makes here, that Jesus makes here back in Matthew chapter 13, when he indicates that there are two different kinds of people. There are the wheat, there are the seeds of the sons of the kingdom, and the tares that are the sons of the wicked one. All right. Now, one thing I got to tell you, the commentaries are kind of funny here. There was a good portion of the commentaries who tried to make this parable about the church. In other words, saying there were followers of Jesus in the church, and there were those who were not following Jesus in the church, right? And that this is saying that you shouldn't be messing with those people, who are there. You should leave them alone until their fruit is shown, and then you should do something about it. I think that's a misinterpretation, and I will say I'm not the only one who thinks that, but the commentaries, I would say, particularly the older commentaries, were very much set on this idea of this being about the church. I really think that the kingdom that he's talking about here is the world, not the church, because frankly, he says so, right? He says back in verse 38, the field is the world. Right? That's where these seeds are being sown, in the world. This is a picture of the church in the world, not the world in the church. Let me say it again. This is a picture of the church in the world, not the world in the church. We are planted by the Lord in the world. He's placed us in the world. Not to be out of the world, not like monks, right? To be separate from the world. He's placed it in the world. In amongst the tares. There's tares all around us in the world. Now, there's also tares in the church. I'm not saying there's not, but that's not the point of the parable, right? The point is, this is a picture of us in the world, the church who are the righteous ones, the church who are Christians in the world. That's what this is a picture of. Now, was there a comment?
No.
All right, so the question I got to ask then is why? Why has God placed tares in the world? And why? Because here's the dilemma that the disciples have. Lord, once we figure out that these are not yours, why not just wipe them out? Why are you leaving them in the world? Why leave the tares in the world? Any thoughts on that?
And that's really what happened in the Old Testament most of the time. When there was something going on that God didn't approve of, 100,000 people died. I mean,
And so this is what the disciples are thinking, right? You know, why in the world are you not just wiping them out? So why is he not? So we're in this, again, we're in this mystery kingdom, right? We're in this kingdom that nobody understands. And part of the thing that they don't understand is why are you not wiping out all of these non-believers?
Doesn't that take away your free will?
Yeah.
Because only God knows whose are his and when they're his, so to speak, when they acknowledge him.
Say that again, Russell. I didn't hear the first part of it.
Those whose are his and when they're his. When they become his, when they accept him.
I think the idea is tares can become wheat, right?
Yeah.
I like Russell's thing where it's, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't.
Sinners can become.
Yeah, that when piece, that they can be saved eventually. We just don't know that.
Yeah, so I think that's one reason. One reason is that he has us here to influence tares, right? To share with tares, to help tares become wheat. Now, you know, in biology, that's not something that can be done. But we're not talking about biology here. We're talking about something spiritual. So I think one of the reasons is, yes, so that we can influence the tares, so that we can minister to the tares. I think that's very much one of the reasons. I think the other reason is so that we can be matured by tribulation, by the trouble of the world, by the annoyance of the world. I think we're left here to benefit our sanctification so that we will grow. Otherwise, it's like, would we grow past anything if we didn't have to? If there wasn't any pressure, if we didn't have to be different from something, right? We wouldn't quite get it. And I think that this is about us learning and us growing and us being learning to be more dependent, etc. So it's an interesting ponder for us as to why the tares are still here. And it certainly was something the disciples didn't understand. It's why they wanted an explanation. So let's keep going because there's more that he helps us with here. So in verse 39, it says, the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Now, if you remember back in verse 25, I pointed out that the enemy came and sowed while men slept. Now, this little statement just tickles my brain, and I'm not sure why. I'll be honest with you. But while men slept, who's sleeping when when Satan comes in and sows the tares? Some of the commentaries indicate, well, maybe they're talking here about the leaders of the church were asleep. Maybe the individual Christians are asleep. Whoever's asleep, they're feeling very secure. They're feeling okay, so they can take a nap. They're not worried about somebody coming in and putting something in the garden, right? So while men slept, partly for me personally, I just get it as while I wasn't paying attention, Satan snuck in, right? While I was asleep, while I thought everything was going just fine, Satan sneaks in. And how does Satan do this? How does Satan sneak in and get tares to grow?
Making it look like wheat.
Making it look like wheat. How does he do that?
With half-truths and the
Deception.
ways that he deceives us.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Half-truths, false prophets, false teachers, churches that don't exactly teach the truth or teach some other gospel, right? Getting more of a rules-based religion, right? What the Pharisees were doing, right? Or maybe going to the opposite extreme and preaching about freedom, which is not exactly the kind of freedom that Christ is talking about. So, Satan uses false truth in order to plant those tares, in order to keep them from becoming wheat, if you will. Now, notice that it also says the harvest is at the end of the age. Now, this again is what freaked out the disciples. So go back for a minute, back to Matthew chapter 3. Let's look at our good friend John the Baptist. In Matthew chapter 3, verse 11, as a part of his preaching, he says the following. He says, I indeed baptize you with water unto repentance, but he who is coming after me is mightier than I, whose sandals I am not worthy to carry. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly clean out his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. So you see here, this is where the disciples get a little bit confused. Wait a minute. John said, when the Messiah comes, he is going to, yes, gather the wheat into the barn, but he's going to burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. So Jesus, why are you not doing that? Right? Why are you not taking these guys and wiping them out? And his response here is that will happen at the end of the age, right? Verse 39, the harvest happens then. It doesn't happen now. It happens at the end. For now, you're going to have to live with these tares. You're going to have to live with them now. Now, I also want you to go back to verse 27. I'm missing something. Hold on a minute. All right. Anyway, I'll just make it up then. Verse 27. It's in my head. It's not in my notes. In verse 27, it says, so the servants of the owner came and said, sir, did you not sow good seeds in your field? How then does it have tares? This is a little bit of a slap in the face to Jesus, right? Jesus, have you messed up? Because there are tares coming up where you planted seed. Was your seed not good? Was your seed not right? Was there something wrong with the seed that you threw out, Jesus? And what's his response? No, there was an enemy who came and did this. Right? It wasn't that there's anything wrong with the seed. There's nothing wrong with the gospel. There's nothing wrong with the word, but the enemy comes in and messes it up. What's interesting here is that his servants, who are, really he's talking about his disciples. Some of his disciples said, wait a minute, is there something, again, why are you letting tares grow? Is there something you put out in the seed that was wrong? And he's trying to give them the bigger picture. No, you got to recognize that there's an enemy. There's an enemy who's working. There's an enemy who's taking that seed and who's growing tares, who is spreading tares out amongst that seed. Now, again, let's stay there a minute. In verse 28, he said to them, an enemy has done this. The servant said to him, do you want us to go and gather them up? Right? The servants, they want to go out and get these guys wiped out right away. Now, this should remind you of another verse. Go to Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9, verse 54. Luke 9:54. And you'll remember this passage. It says, and when they did not, I'm 54. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, just like Elijah did, right? So they're walking along the roads. The Samaritans don't pay them respect. And James and John said, hey, let's just wipe them out, right? They obviously are not believers. They're obviously not followers of you. Let's wipe them out. Let's crush them. Right? This is the same idea. This is the same idea of these servants who say, hey, let's pull those tares up right now. I do want to, just as an aside, I want you to see James chapter 1. Go there. I want you to see this one. I want you to put a little asterisk by it. It's one of those verses that we all need in our pocket. James chapter 1, verse 19. James, right after Hebrews, James 1:19. I says, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Right? The wrath of man, the anger of man, the shocking speech of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So why does Jesus, let's go back now, why does Jesus not want us to pull out the tares? Now with our understanding of what the tares are, why does Jesus not want us to pull out the tares? You touched on some of the answer a little bit ago, but why?
We can't tell the difference. I mean, we can't tell the difference, but I mean, you were saying that two different things are growing up, they look exactly the same. We can't tell the difference between those two. So we need to be still, trying to treating them just like they're believers. They may be. I mean, we don't know.
Yeah, I think, again, I think you guys addressed this a little bit ago. I absolutely agree with you. Right? We do not have that discernment. We do not have the spiritual knowledge to judge people. And in fact, as we talked about last week, we would love those who come out of the rocky soil, right? They spring up fast. They're so excited, right? We love the weeds. They look just like the wheat. We cannot tell the difference. And in fact, God, the timing thing that somebody mentioned earlier, I can't remember, it was Russell or CT or whoever, right? The timing, we don't know when someone is going to come to the Lord. God may very well have chosen someone who right now you dislike intensely. Someone you hate right now, God may have chosen, right? And for us to judge, right? This is what you remember, right? This is what the judge not thing is all about. Us condemning them in our minds, us writing them off. It is not our job now to judge the world. That's God's job. And in fact, in doing so, we sound a lot like the Pharisees. Well, if you just do these things right, just do those things right. These people are obviously not Christians. These people are obviously not right. It's not our job to attack the world. We're not to pray to God to destroy them, but pray to God to redeem them. I'm saying all this in spiritual language, but make sure you're getting the message. When we start talking about those people, that group of people, that those people who say those kinds of things, those people that vote that way, those people who are on the TV, it's not our job. It's not our job to say, I don't like those people. I wish they would go away. I wish they would stop saying that. It's our job to say, Lord, redeem them. Pray for them.
Rich, it's almost like you're saying, Jesus is saying it's not their fault. It's evil is evil, and we're all susceptible to it. So who are we to judge? He's putting the blame squarely on the shoulder of evil, on Satan, and not on people.
I guess I wouldn't go quite that far, Russell, because they're the ones that are sinning. They are going to be responsible for their sin. I think what he is saying is it's not our job to make that determination, but we can't tell, right? That's the main message he's trying to get across here. It's not our job to judge. It's not our job to condemn. It's not our job to scream out at them, because that's in God's hand.
I think that's one of the, at least for me, that's one of the primary messages that I get from the parable of the story of the woman caught in adultery. Now you've got these guys that bring this lady to Jesus, and they're like among the most righteous, or thought themselves to be among the most righteous in Israel. And Jesus, that whole story is pointing out the fact that even those people who considered themselves to be the most righteous in Israel were not capable of judging this woman, because they all had sin. We all do.
Right.
Rich,
Now, go ahead.
I understand a lot more the timing part of this that we're discussing about why we don't pull up the tears, because that's exactly right. We don't ever give up on anyone. We never pull up the tears. But I struggle a little bit with when you say, well, we can't tell and we don't know, because we just read that, the children of God are obvious. And I've always struggled a little bit with that verse, the children of God and the children of the devil, the two are obvious to us. So, I mean,
I would say let's go back. How do you know that someone is a child of God?
Well,
Their fruits.
their fruits, and it
By their
says,
fruit, right?
Yep.
By their fruit. So if someone does not have fruit, does that mean that they're not a child of God?
No.
no,
So we don't know, right? Because we don't, for one, we're lousy fruit inspectors. Right? We're terrible at it. Because we look at fruit that looks just like ours. If they don't have fruit like ours, they obviously are not good fruit. The other thing is we don't know where they are in the blooming cycle, right? Their fruit may still to come, the timing thing as we've talked about. So I don't think you can, look at a group of people and say, well, I know who are the redeemed and who are the unredeemed. We can't do it in a point in time.
what does it mean by the children of the devil are obvious?
Where you get.
Where do you see that?
Back in Matthew?
Back what we just read in 1 John 3:10. Says the children of
Yeah,
God
okay.
of the devil
Yeah.
are obvious.
Yeah, obviously, I don't know. I think that, he's certainly saying that you can tell them by their fruit, right? I think the point is that there is some point that it is obvious, but I think it may be obvious to him, but it's not obvious to me.
I mean, you can say that. I mean, I've heard stories. I can't tell you a particular one right off, but Satanists being saved. Satan worshiper becoming a believer.
Mhm.
You're looking at them, you're saying they're not a believer. Eventually, they became a believer. So I think it's just the time thing.
So
I
the
mean,
time, yeah,
I
that
mean,
makes.
so you can
such-
look at it right now and go, oh, they're of Satan. And it's-
I wrote a little note in my Bible way back when Pastor Wilder was with us, where he called this the most shocking scripture, to him, in the Bible. And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's strong,
The version I in New King James and NIV doesn't have it, but in the CSB, it kind of where it says they become obvious.
Yeah, it does.
That makes more sense, doesn't it?
All right, so picture Bible.
Yeah.
The other thing I just want to add on here is we can't apply spiritual principles to the rest of the world. We can't have Christian expectations for those who are unsaved, right? In other words, I wish people would act so and so. I wish people would do that. Because, as Russell said a minute ago, they are doing all that they know to do as being captured by the wicked one. They're still responsible for it. They're still responsible for their sin. But to expect them to act like Christians, expect them to, I think, again, we try to fix people by fixing their actions, by fixing their speaking, rather than understanding that this is a spiritual matter, right? Their spirit has to change. They have to have the Holy Spirit in order to actually act in a different way. So don't try to enforce the Sermon on the Mount on unsaved people, right? Don't think, well, they really ought to act this way. Well, they can't. The Sermon on the Mount is for saved people.
But for us believers though, Rich, we are to be proactive instead of being fruit inspectors of everybody else. We need to inspect our own fruit.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the part of maturity that applies.
Were we not all tares at one time?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of us still smell like tares. So yeah.
It's, I think it's been mentioned a couple times, but, we talk about timing. And if you go back into the parable, when the servants come and they want to go out and pull up the tares, he says, no, don't do it. Well, why not? Because at that point in time, you really couldn't tell the difference between the wheat and the tares. But then we get back over to the explanation and he says the harvest is at the end of the age. So from now, where we have wheat and tares growing together till the end of the age, at the end of the age, then it's going to be very obvious. Who's a child of the devil? Who's a child of God?
Right. That is the message he's trying to get across to them. Absolutely. Right. Don't be messing with this problem now.
No.
It's a problem that is going to be taken care of at the harvest. Bill, I do want to go back to verse 29 again, right? He says, when they say, why don't we do it now? And he says, no, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. What does that mean? How would you uproot the wheat? What does that imply?
If you don't know what you're doing, if you're not applying, his judgment that's only reserved for him, you're grabbing groups of wheat and tares together. So you can't, as you said, we can't tell. And so we're not going to be discerning, and we're going to just, grab bunches of everything we can. And,
Well,
Well,
again,
what if God's
when
working
we-
on their heart?
when you go
And
back,
he's already drawing them in, and then somebody comes along who's more mature and says, you're not doing it right. Well, you destroy the process of growing for that individual. He's not quite there, but God knows eventually he's going to be there.
Or he's a
It's
new
the timing
believer.
thing, yeah.
Or he's a new believer and you may not
Yeah,
realize that. We don't know. They've not matured or anything.
Or back to the scripture, causing a brother to stumble.
Yeah.
It's almost like the weeds are there for our training and understanding, to understand God's attributes more, to become more like him. you've got all this evil amongst us, you know?
And that's all good. I agree with all of that. And to add to it a little bit deeper is, it says you're going to uproot the roots of the wheat, right? In other words, you're going to uproot your own roots by messing with this, right? Because now you're going to become, oh, I know the difference between Christians and non-Christians. I am going to make a judgment. I am going to, kick this guy out of the church, or not be friends with him, or not pray for him, right? Well, again, you're setting yourself above God. You're hurting your own sanctification. You're hurting your own dependence upon God by doing that.
You also may be drawing yourself into the other,
Right.
onto the other side. I mean, first, whatever is detrimental to the believer.
We're not free from the struggles that the tares are going through, and if you want to put yourself in that category where Christians and non-Christians go through the same thing. You may have a brother who's going through a terrible time in his life. He may be making the right decisions in your opinion, and you may think, oh, this guy, there's no way this guy's a Christian because of the thing he's going through in his family. And the damage you could do to another brother by not lifting him up and just being understanding and just lifting him up, like God make the decision on that. There was a free will thing. The church should be overrun if you knew the tares were getting burned, would you not turn to Christ and say, oh, well, I'm everybody be running to the church?
Yeah, what's interesting is, if you know that if you realize that you're a tare, you need to recognize you're in a time of grace right now, but judgment's coming.
Yeah.
Right.
And we talked about the fact that when the crop first starts to come up and you got wheat and tares mixed together, as you pointed out, this particular thing that they're talking about when they talk about tares was almost indistinguishable from the wheat when it was in its very early stages. And I think that's one of the things that's been a real burden on my heart for years and years and years is new believers. I mean, we clap and we rejoice when someone's baptized, and then you just kind of leave them to go on their way. And that's when they're most vulnerable, because a lot of times new believers answer an altar call, come to baptism, riding an emotional high, and that emotional high does not last. And when the emotional high is gone, then you lose a lot of those people. So it's really important that we come alongside rather than trying to pluck them out. The ones that, the word fell on good shallow soil and they sprang right up, but then they withered out. You got to come alongside them and try to help them. Because we're, as you say, it's been pointed out, at that stage, we don't really know, who's good, who's bad. And it's not our job to judge. It's our job to come alongside and love them. So.
Good. All right, let's go back to verse 39. We took a side trip, intentional. Back to verse 39, right? The enemy is the one who sowed them. The harvest is the end of the age. The reapers are the angels, right? The reapers, the judgment is done by the angels, not us. We ain't the judgers. It's the angels. They are the ones who come in. I do want you to flip over to Matthew 16 a minute. Matthew 16, verse 27. Mine says, for the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Notice here in verse 41, it says the Son of Man will send out his angels, right? These are his angels. This is his judgment. He's sending them out. And we've learned a lot about this as we studied Revelation, right? That the angels are the ones that are sent down that pour out the bowls and do all that work, right? They are at the behest of Christ in doing that. So verse 40, I went ahead. But verse 40, therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age, right? This is the everlasting punishment. And then 41, the Son of Man will send out his angels. They will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and those that practice lawlessness. So again, the angels are sent as the reapers into his kingdom. Notice again, the word his in here is really important. His angels in his kingdom, and they now come and take all of the tares, bind them up, all that offend, all the word offend there is really a stumbling block. Anything that is a stumbling block, anyone who is a stumbling block, those that practice lawlessness, and cast them into the furnace of fire, where there'll be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Right? And you know from our other studies, the wailing and gnashing of teeth is what goes on. And then let's finish up in verse 43. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. The righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. So now that all of the tares are gone, all you have left are the righteous wheat, if you will, in the field, and they can then shine forth as the sun. I just remember back in our study of Daniel, right? He talked about the those who follow God were as bright as the firmament, bright as the stars in the sky. It's the same picture that we have here. The righteous will shine forth once the tares are out. Once the tares have done their job of helping to grow and sanctify the wheat. He who has ears, let him hear. In other words, you better listen. And I think, as we said earlier, just to kind of wrap, are you wheat or are you tares? If you're tares, recognize that you're in a time of grace, but there will be judgment. And if you're wheat, remember, it's not your job to judge the tares. You're there to be an influence for good. You're there to use to reach the tares. You're there not to judge, but to love. All right, I'm done. Any other thoughts on this?
The only other thing that is, I think, real convicting when we go back to this also is, how obvious are we, that we are wheat and not a tare? I mean, we are to be obvious. Does my lifestyle, glorify God, and I don't make people wonder if I'm a wheat or a tare, or, just, we ought to be obvious that we are wheat, the way we talk, the way we love others, etc.
Yeah, good. Anything else? All right, Hugh, over to you. Let me turn off the recording before somebody tells me.
That's our job.
That's BT's job.
All right, what about Joe? Anything here?
Mm-mm.